You're looking at a daguerreotype from October 1841, taken in the parlor of the Whitmore family home in Millbrook Township, Pennsylvania. What appears to be a standard mourning photograph shows 7-year-old Timothy Whitmore lying in his pine coffin, surrounded by his grieving relatives. The image was commissioned by local photographer Ezra Caldwell, using the newly popular practice of post-mortem photography to preserve a final memory of the deceased child. Timothy had succumbed to scarlet fever after a 3-day battle that left him cold and rigid by dawn on October 14th. But when this photograph was restored in 1987 by the Millbrook Historical Society, something impossible became visible in the silver nitrate emulsion. The boy's eyes were open, staring directly at the camera lens, with an expression of profound awareness. More disturbing still, careful examination revealed that Timothy appeared to be sitting upright in his coffin, though every witness present swore he remained motionless throughout the sitting. Dr. Marcus Henley, the attending physician who had pronounced the child dead, documented the body's complete rigidity in his medical ledger. The ambient temperature that October morning was recorded as 38 degrees Fahrenheit by the Township Weather Observer. Caldwell's exposure required 12 minutes of absolute stillness, yet the photographic plate captured movement where none should have existed. The daguerreotype process, still experimental in rural Pennsylvania, demanded precise chemical timing that Caldwell had mastered after 18 months of practice. Local carpenter Josiah Mills had measured Timothy's body at 49 inches before constructing the child-sized coffin from local white pine. The wake began at sunrise and continued for 6 hours, observed by 14 members of the extended Whitmore family. Methodist minister Reverend Samuel Clark conducted the service, noting in his parish register that the child's complexion remained unusually pale even for the deceased. Yet the photograph tells a different story, one that contradicts every documented detail of that morning. The restored image shows Timothy's face bearing natural color, his small hands positioned as if gripping the coffin's edge. Shadow analysis conducted by Pennsylvania State University's photography department in 1988 confirmed that the light source illuminating Timothy's face came from below, not from Caldwell's overhead reflector system. This impossible illumination suggests movement during the lengthy exposure time, though physics and eyewitness accounts make such movement unthinkable. The daguerreotype's silver surface bears no signs of tampering, double exposure, or chemical manipulation according to forensic analysis. What you're seeing defies both the photographic technology of 1841 and the biological certainty of death. But the photograph represents only the beginning of Timothy Whitmore's impossible story. 3 days after his burial in Millbrook Cemetery's eastern section, the first sightings began. Mrs. Adelaide Fenwick, the cemetery's groundskeeper, reported seeing a small figure in white clothing walking among the headstones at dawn. The sightings occurred precisely at sunrise for 7 consecutive mornings, always in the vicinity of Timothy's freshly covered grave. Each witness described the same details: a barefoot child in a burial shroud, moving with purposeful direction toward the cemetery's iron gates. When townspeople investigated Timothy's burial site, they found his coffin remained 6 feet underground, completely undisturbed and properly sealed. The mystery deepened when Caldwell developed additional daguerreotypes from that October morning. These subsequent images, taken at 5-minute intervals, show progressive changes in Timothy's position within the coffin. By the final exposure, the boy appears to be standing upright, though his coffin lid remained closed throughout the entire wake. The mathematical impossibility of these sequential photographs baffled optical experts from Philadelphia's Franklin Institute. Dr. Theodore Ashworth, professor of natural philosophy at Millbrook College, examined the daguerreotypes using the era's most advanced magnification techniques. His findings, sealed in the college archives until 1923, contained measurements that defied conventional understanding of both death and photography. The case file, compiled by Township Constable Robert Sterling, documented 17 separate witness accounts, each corroborating impossible details. Sterling's investigation revealed that Timothy's burial shroud, hand-sewn by his mother from imported Irish linen, had been found intact in his coffin during a discreet exhumation. Yet multiple witnesses had observed the walking figure wearing identical white cloth that moved independently in the windless October air. The boy walks as if searching for something he cannot remember losing. The autumn of 1841 marked a period of unprecedented medical uncertainty in rural Pennsylvania's farming communities. Scarlet fever epidemics swept through isolated townships, where the nearest trained physician often lived days away by horseback. Death certificates frequently relied on family observations rather than professional diagnosis, creating gaps in medical documentation that persist in county records today. The recently completed Pennsylvania canal system had brought both commerce and disease to previously isolated settlements like Millbrook Township. Steam-powered machinery was transforming local industries, while gas lighting remained a luxury reserved for the wealthiest households in nearby Harrisburg. Most families still relied on candlelight and oil lamps, creating the perpetual twilight atmosphere that characterized rural American life. Dr. Marcus Henley's medical ledger, discovered in 1934, behind a false wall in his former office, reveals the primitive diagnostic methods of the era. Henley recorded patient temperatures using hand-touch assessment and documented symptoms through family testimony rather than direct examination. His entry for Timothy Whitmore, dated October 14, 1841, describes complete cessation of vital signs observed through mirror breath test and pulse detection. The physician's notes indicate he applied heated coins to Timothy's chest and detected no responsive movement after 30 minutes. Yet Henley's private correspondence, found sealed in his desk drawer, expresses profound unease about the Whitmore case. A letter addressed to Dr. William Crawford of Philadelphia, never sent, describes anomalous readings that contradict established medical doctrine. Henley documented Timothy's core body temperature as matching the ambient room temperature within 2 hours of declared death. The rigidity he observed and recorded followed expected post-mortem patterns, beginning in the jaw and extending through the extremities. However, his confidential notes mention periodic warmth detected in the child's palm during the wake preparation. This observation directly contradicted the cooling process Henley had witnessed in hundreds of previous cases throughout his 20-year practice. The Millbrook Township Death Registry, maintained by clerk Edmund Harwick, lists Timothy Whitmore's cause of death as fever-induced organ failure. Harwick's meticulous record-keeping included notation of burial permits, coffin construction details, and cemetery plot assignments. His registry entry for Timothy contains an unusual addendum, written in different ink and dated 3 weeks later. The addendum reads, "Gravesite requires ongoing monitoring per Constable Sterling's recommendation and family request." Parish records from Millbrook Methodist Church, maintained by Reverend Samuel Clark, provide additional context for the community's response. Clark documented 14 separate prayer requests, related to unnatural disturbances in the weeks following Timothy's funeral. His weekly sermon notes from October 1841 reference biblical passages about resurrection, though he avoided direct mention of the Whitmore case. The Reverend's private journal, donated to the church archives in 1891, reveals his growing concern about manifestations that challenge theological understanding. Clark recorded multiple conversations with parishioners who reported unusual experiences near the cemetery during October's final weeks. These accounts, written in Clark's careful script, describe consistent details that align with later official investigations. The township's official explanation attributed the sightings to grief-induced hallucinations, combined with the psychological stress of harvest season. Constable Sterling's preliminary report, filed with the county sheriff, classified the incidents as public disturbance requiring community reassurance rather than criminal investigation. However, Sterling's personal notes, discovered in his family papers decades later, reveal deep skepticism about this official conclusion. He privately documented physical evidence that contradicted natural explanations, including unexplained depressions in the cemetery soil. Sterling measured these impressions at precisely the size and depth consistent with a child's bare footprints. The constable's investigation methods, though primitive by modern standards, followed systematic protocols he had learned during his previous service with the Pennsylvania State Police. His evidence collection included detailed sketches, witness interview transcripts, and careful documentation of timeline sequences. Sterling's case file grew to encompass 47 pages of handwritten observations, making it the most thoroughly documented incident in Millbrook Township's history. The official case remained open through November 1841, though public discussion gradually diminished as winter approached and agricultural concerns took precedence. What Sterling discovered in those cemetery soil samples would challenge everything the township thought it understood about death itself. The first documented anomaly occurred at precisely 6:47 a.m. on October 17th, 3 days after Timothy's burial, beneath Millbrook Cemetery's towering oak trees. Mrs. Adelaide Fenwick had arrived to tend the graves as part of her daily groundskeeping routine, carrying her leather tool satchel and wearing her customary black woolen dress. The morning temperature registered 29 degrees Fahrenheit, creating a thin layer of frost that covered the cemetery's wrought iron fence and marble headstones. Fenwick's leather boots crunched audibly on the frozen grass as she approached the eastern section, where Timothy's grave lay beneath a mound of fresh Pennsylvania soil. What she observed defied both logic and her 30 years of cemetery maintenance experience throughout the county's rural communities. A small figure in white clothing stood motionless beside Timothy's grave marker, facing east toward the rising sun, with perfect posture. The figure appeared to be a child of approximately 7 years, matching Timothy's documented height and build according to Fenwick's later testimony. She approached within 20 feet before the figure turned toward her, revealing a pale face with large, dark eyes that seemed to reflect light like polished glass. Fenwick noted that the child's feet were bare, despite the freezing ground temperature, yet left no visible impressions in the frost-covered soil. The white clothing appeared to be a burial shroud of fine linen, moving gently in the windless morning air, as if animated by an internal force. When Fenwick called out a greeting, the figure began walking toward the cemetery's main entrance with smooth gliding steps that produced no sound. She followed at a distance of 30 yards, noting that the child's movement created no disturbance in the frost patterns covering the pathways. The figure paused at the iron gates, turned back toward Fenwick for exactly 10 seconds, then vanished between the vertical bars without opening the locked entrance. Fenwick immediately examined the gate mechanism and found it securely fastened with the heavy iron chain and padlock she had checked the previous evening. Her investigation of the cemetery grounds revealed no footprints, disturbed soil, or other physical evidence of the figure's presence. Yet the encounter had lasted approximately 12 minutes and occurred in full daylight under clear visibility conditions. Fenwick documented her observations in the groundskeeping log she maintained for the Millbrook Township Cemetery Association. Her entry, written in careful script, describes unusual visitor requiring investigation by appropriate authorities due to trespassing concerns. However, her private letter to her sister in Lancaster County, discovered in family papers in 1952, reveals the true extent of her alarm. The letter describes a child who walked without touching the ground and possessed eyes that held knowledge no living person should carry. Fenwick's account prompted Constable Sterling to establish a systematic observation schedule beginning October 18th. Sterling positioned himself behind the cemetery's tool shed at 6:30 a.m. Armed with a brass telescope and his official documentation materials. His detailed notes describe identical sightings occurring at sunrise for 6 consecutive mornings, each lasting between 10 and 15 minutes. Sterling's measurements indicated the figure consistently appeared within 5 feet of Timothy's grave before beginning its eastward walk toward the gates. The constable noted that local roosters ceased crowing during each apparition, resuming their calls only after the figure disappeared. Temperature readings taken with his mercury thermometer showed a consistent drop of 8 degrees in the figure's immediate vicinity. Sterling attempted direct communication on October 21st, approaching within 10 feet, while calling Timothy's name in a clear, authoritative voice. The figure responded by turning toward Sterling and extending one arm as if reaching for something beyond the constable's position. This gesture lasted exactly 15 seconds before the figure resumed its walk toward the gates and vanished through the locked entrance. Sterling's official report to the county sheriff described unexplained phenomena requiring investigation by qualified experts in natural philosophy. His private notes reveal growing conviction that the manifestations represented something beyond conventional understanding or criminal activity. The constable's documentation methods included precise timing measurements using his grandfather's pocket watch, inherited from Revolutionary War service. Sterling's systematic approach provided the most reliable evidence base for later investigators, though his conclusions challenged accepted scientific doctrine. His final observation occurred on October 23rd, when the figure appeared to acknowledge his presence by nodding once before beginning its customary walk. Sterling realized that whatever walked in Millbrook Cemetery possessed an intelligence that recognized his documentation efforts and approved of his respectful distance. Dr. Theodore Ashworth arrived from Millbrook College on October 25th, carrying a leather case containing the era's most sophisticated optical instruments imported from London's scientific suppliers. Ashworth, professor of natural philosophy and corresponding member of the American Philosophical Society, brought his reputation as Pennsylvania's foremost expert in unexplained phenomena to bear on the case. His investigation kit included a precision telescope manufactured by Dollond and Aitchison, a camera lucida for accurate sketching, and temperature measurement devices calibrated to scientific standards. The professor established his observation post in the cemetery's northwest corner, providing clear sightlines to Timothy's grave while maintaining the respectful distance Sterling had found effective. Ashworth's first encounter occurred at sunrise on October 26th, documented in his field notebook using the systematic methodology he had developed during previous investigations in Philadelphia and Baltimore. His observations confirmed Sterling's basic findings, while adding crucial details that would reshape understanding of the phenomena's underlying nature. The figure appeared at exactly 6:51 a.m., emerging not from behind Timothy's headstone, but materializing gradually from transparency to solid form over approximately 90 seconds. Ashworth measured this manifestation process using his chronometer, noting that the figure achieved full opacity precisely as the sun cleared the eastern horizon. Through his telescope, the professor observed that the child's burial shroud bore intricate embroidery work consistent with Irish textile traditions, common among Pennsylvania's immigrant families. More significantly, Ashworth detected that the figure cast no shadow, despite the strong directional sunlight that created distinct shadows for all cemetery monuments and vegetation. The professor's temperature measurements revealed an ambient drop of 12 degrees Fahrenheit within a 15-foot radius of the figure's position. This thermal anomaly persisted throughout the figure's appearance and dissipated gradually over 10 minutes after its disappearance. Ashworth noted that his breath became visible during these temperature drops, though the figure itself showed no signs of exhalation or respiratory activity. When the figure began its customary walk toward the cemetery gates, Ashworth followed at precisely 20 yards, maintaining detailed observations throughout the journey. His measurements indicated the figure's pace remained constant at exactly 2 miles per hour, never varying despite changes in ground elevation or surface conditions. The professor documented that the figure's feet appeared to maintain contact with the ground, while leaving no impressions in soft soil or disturbed leaves. At the cemetery gates, Ashworth positioned himself to observe the figure's departure method using his most powerful magnification lens. His notes described the figure pausing for 30 seconds, during which it appeared to examine the iron lock mechanism with apparent recognition. The figure then stepped forward into the solid iron bars, passing through the metal as if it possessed no physical density, before vanishing completely on the roadway beyond. Ashworth immediately examined the gate structure and found no alterations, gaps, or mechanical explanations for the figure's passage. His scientific instruments detected no residual electromagnetic effects, temperature changes, or other measurable traces of the figure's interaction with the iron barrier. Professor Ashworth's preliminary report to Millbrook College described phenomena that challenge fundamental assumptions about matter, consciousness, and the boundary between life and death. His private correspondence with Dr. Samuel Morton of Philadelphia's Academy of Natural Sciences reveals deeper concerns about the implications of his findings. Ashworth wrote, "If consciousness can persist and manifest physically after biological death, our understanding of human nature requires complete revision." The professor's detailed sketches, preserved in the college archives, show progressive changes in the figure's appearance over multiple observation sessions. Early drawings depict a childlike form with clearly defined features, while later sketches show increasing transparency and loss of facial detail. Ashworth theorized that the manifestation was gradually weakening, though he could identify no mechanism to explain this apparent deterioration. His final observation on October 30th recorded a figure so translucent that surrounding cemetery monuments remained clearly visible through its form. The professor's scientific instruments detected progressively weaker temperature effects and shorter manifestation duration with each successive appearance. Ashworth concluded his investigation with the recommendation that qualified experts from Harvard's Department of Natural Philosophy be consulted for advanced analysis. However, his request for additional academic involvement was denied by college administrators, who expressed concern about the institution's reputation for serious, scientific inquiry. The professor's final report remained classified in Millbrook College archives until 1923, when it was discovered during a routine inventory of historical documents. Ashworth's careful measurements had documented something impossible: the gradual dissolution of a consciousness that refused to accept the finality of death. 3 competing theories emerged from the mounting evidence, each supported by credible authorities, yet contradicted by insurmountable obstacles that prevented definitive resolution. Dr. Marcus Henley proposed the medical explanation in his confidential report to the Pennsylvania State Medical Board, dated November 2, 1841. Henley theorized that Timothy had suffered cataleptic seizure rather than death, a condition that could mimic mortality while preserving minimal life functions below detectable thresholds. His theory gained support from documented cases in European medical journals, where patients declared dead had recovered after burial preparations began. The physician cited Timothy's unusually rapid symptom progression and the family's inexperience with medical evaluation as factors that could explain misdiagnosis. Henley's catalepsy theory accounted for the photographic anomalies by suggesting Timothy had regained consciousness during the lengthy daguerreotype exposure process. However, this medical explanation failed to address Timothy's confirmed burial 6 feet underground in a sealed pine coffin, witnessed by 14 family members. The theory also could not explain the cemetery sightings, temperature anomalies, or the figure's ability to pass through solid iron barriers. Constable Sterling developed the criminal conspiracy theory after discovering inconsistencies in witness testimonies and timeline documentation during his expanded investigation. Sterling suspected that Timothy's death had been staged as part of an inheritance scheme involving his uncle, Marcus Whitmore, who stood to inherit the family's 340-acre farm. The constable documented suspicious financial transactions between Marcus Whitmore and traveling medicine shows that performed throughout Pennsylvania during harvest season. Sterling theorized that a child actor of similar appearance had been substituted for Timothy, allowing the real boy to escape while a Confederate created the cemetery apparitions. This criminal explanation addressed the photographic evidence by suggesting Caldwell had been paid to manipulate the daguerreotype process, using techniques learned from theatrical photographers. Sterling's theory explained the systematic nature of the sightings and their consistent timing as evidence of deliberate staging rather than supernatural phenomena. However, the conspiracy theory collapsed when Sterling's investigation revealed that Marcus Whitmore had died of consumption in Ohio 3 months before Timothy's illness began. Additionally, the constable's own measurements of the figure's supernatural abilities, particularly its passage through solid barriers, defied any known staging techniques. Professor Ashworth presented the paranormal theory in his sealed report to the American Philosophical Society, arguing for consciousness persistence beyond biological death. Ashworth proposed that Timothy's traumatic death experience had created what he termed psychic resonance that manifested through environmental interaction with electromagnetic fields. His theory suggested that the child's consciousness remained anchored to physical reality through emotional attachment to familiar locations and family members. The professor's measurements of temperature fluctuations and electromagnetic disturbances supported his hypothesis about non-corporeal consciousness affecting material conditions. Ashworth cited similar cases documented by European investigators, including the Cheltenham ghost of 1882 and the drummer of Tedworth from 1661. His paranormal theory explained both the photographic anomalies and cemetery sightings as manifestations of consciousness attempting communication through available physical mediums. The theory addressed the figure's gradual weakening as evidence that psychic energy naturally dissipated over time without biological support systems. However, Ashworth's paranormal explanation faced criticism from religious authorities, who argued it contradicted established theological doctrine about soul departure after death. The theory also failed to explain why Timothy's consciousness would manifest in repetitive walking patterns, rather than attempting direct communication with family members. Each theory contained compelling elements that aligned with documented evidence while simultaneously creating new questions that remained unanswerable, using 1841's available investigative methods. The medical theory's strength lay in its scientific foundation, yet it crumbled against the physical impossibility of Timothy's confirmed burial status. The criminal theory provided logical motives and methods, but Sterling's own evidence gathering had eliminated the necessary conspirators and staging capabilities. The paranormal theory offered the most comprehensive explanation for observed phenomena, though it challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness, death, and physical reality. By November 1841, investigators faced the disturbing conclusion that Timothy Whitmore's case defied every framework humans had developed to understand the boundary between life and death. The culminating event occurred during the pre-dawn hours of November 3, 1841, when multiple witnesses gathered in Millbrook Cemetery for what would become the case's most harrowing and definitive encounter. Constable Sterling had organized the vigil after receiving reports that the manifestations were becoming more frequent and occurring at unpredictable times throughout the night. Present at the scene were Sterling, Professor Ashworth, Reverend Clark, cemetery groundskeeper Adelaide Fenwick, and Timothy's father, Jonathan Whitmore, who had requested permission to confront whatever was disturbing his son's eternal rest. The group positioned themselves near the cemetery's central monument at 2:45 a.m., equipped with lanterns, Sterling's documentation materials, and Ashworth's scientific instruments. Temperature readings showed a steady 34 degrees Fahrenheit with no wind, creating optimal conditions for observation and measurement under the clear November sky. At exactly 3:17 a.m., all 5 witnesses observed Timothy's figure materialize beside his grave with unprecedented clarity and duration. Unlike previous sightings, the figure remained stationary for over 20 minutes, allowing detailed observation that revealed disturbing new characteristics. The child's burial shroud appeared freshly soiled with dark earth stains, and his bare feet bore visible dirt despite leaving no footprints on the ground. Most unsettling, Timothy's face showed signs of decomposition that contradicted his previous appearances: sunken cheeks, darkened eye sockets, and pale lips that moved soundlessly. Professor Ashworth's temperature measurements detected a dramatic drop to 18 degrees Fahrenheit in the figure's immediate vicinity, causing visible frost formation on nearby grass and headstones. The metallic components of Sterling's pocket watch stopped functioning, while Ashworth's precision chronometer began running backward at double speed. Reverend Clark attempted to recite burial prayers, but his voice became inaudible despite normal mouth movements, as if sound itself was being absorbed by the figure's presence. Jonathan Whitmore stepped forward and called his son's name, in a voice filled with paternal authority and desperate love. Timothy's figure turned toward his father with recognition that transcended the boundaries between the living and the dead, extending both arms as if seeking an embrace. The temperature plummeted further to near zero levels, creating ice crystals in the air that reflected moonlight like suspended diamonds throughout the cemetery. When Jonathan moved within 5 feet of his son's figure, the manifestation began to speak in Timothy's unmistakable voice, though the words seemed to emanate from the ground beneath rather than the figure's moving lips. The child's message, recorded verbatim in Sterling's notes, consisted of a single sentence repeated 3 times. "Father, I cannot find the door to go home." This communication lasted exactly 45 seconds, during which all witnesses reported feeling an overwhelming sensation of profound sadness and desperate searching. Timothy's figure then began to fade gradually, while simultaneously reaching toward his father with increasing urgency, as if time was running out for essential communication. The manifestation's dissolution process reversed the previous materialization sequence, beginning with transparency in the extremities, and concluding with the disappearance of the child's imploring eyes. As the figure vanished completely, the temperature returned to normal levels over approximately 3 minutes, while the stop timepieces resumed normal operation. The frozen ground where Timothy had stood showed a perfect impression of small, bare feet, though the soil had been solidly frozen before the manifestation began. Most disturbing, the footprint impressions remained visible and unfrozen for the remainder of the night, despite temperatures dropping below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Sterling's investigation of Timothy's grave revealed that the soil surface had somehow been disturbed from below, creating hairline cracks in precise geometric patterns around the headstone's base. Professor Ashworth's final measurements detected residual electromagnetic activity that persisted until sunrise, gradually weakening but never completely disappearing. The 5 witnesses remained in the cemetery until dawn, but Timothy's figure did not reappear, despite the approach of his customary manifestation time. Reverend Clark led a prayer service at sunrise, after which the group agreed that Timothy's message suggested consciousness trapped between worlds and seeking resolution. Jonathan Whitmore requested that his son's grave be opened for examination, though he feared what such investigation might reveal about Timothy's true condition. What the witnesses experienced that November night convinced them that death itself was not the absolute boundary they had always believed it to be. The immediate aftermath of November 3rd's encounter prompted swift action by township authorities, who could no longer dismiss the accumulated evidence as mass hysteria or natural phenomena. County Sheriff William Dorset arrived from Harrisburg on November 5th with legal authorization for grave exhumation, accompanied by Dr. Charles Morrison from the State Medical Examiner's Office. The exhumation began at dawn on November 7th under the supervision of 6 official witnesses, including Sterling, Ashworth, and Reverend Clark, who documented every detail of the procedure. Carpenter Josiah Mills, who had constructed Timothy's original coffin, assisted with the careful excavation, using specialized tools designed to preserve evidence integrity. When workers reached the coffin at precisely 6 feet depth, they discovered the pine lid had developed a network of hairline cracks that formed intricate geometric patterns identical to those found on the grave's surface. The coffin's interior revealed Timothy's body in an impossible state of preservation, appearing exactly as he had during the October wake, despite 30 days of underground burial. More disturbing, the burial shroud showed fresh soil stains matching those observed on the manifesting figure, though the coffin had remained sealed throughout the burial period. Dr. Morrison's examination detected no signs of decomposition, bodily corruption, or other changes expected after prolonged interment in Pennsylvania's moist autumn soil. Timothy's physical position within the coffin had shifted from the supine burial arrangement to a sitting posture, with arms extended upward, as if reaching toward the lid. The coffin's interior walls bore small handprint impressions pressed into the pine wood, with sufficient force to create permanent indentations, despite the wood's hardness. Most unsettling, Timothy's eyes remained open with the same expression of awareness captured in Caldwell's daguerreotype, staring directly upward toward the cemetery surface. Dr. Morrison could detect no pulse, respiration, or other vital signs. Yet the body maintained normal temperature and skin elasticity, consistent with recent death. The physician's official report documented these findings while acknowledging their contradiction of established medical understanding about post-mortem processes. Sheriff Dorset ordered the coffin resealed and reburied immediately, though he privately confided to Sterling that the case challenged his fundamental assumptions about mortality. Following the reburial, manifestations ceased entirely for 3 months, leading investigators to theorize that the exhumation had somehow provided Timothy's consciousness with necessary confirmation of his physical condition. However, cemetery sightings resumed in February 1842 with increased frequency and expanded geographic range throughout Millbrook Township's surrounding farmland. Mrs. Helena Patterson reported seeing Timothy's figure walking along Millbrook Creek at sunrise on February 14th, approximately 2 miles from the cemetery. Farmer Douglas McKnight observed the same figure crossing his wheat fields on February 20th, moving purposefully toward the abandoned Whitmore family homestead. These expanded sightings suggested that Timothy's consciousness was no longer confined to cemetery grounds, but was actively exploring familiar locations from his brief lifetime. Professor Ashworth's follow-up investigation documented manifestations at 7 different locations connected to Timothy's life experiences: his former school, the creek where he had fished, and various neighbors' farms he had visited. The pattern suggested systematic searching behavior, as if Timothy's consciousness was methodically revisiting significant memories while seeking something specific but unidentifiable. Ashworth theorized that the consciousness was attempting to reconstruct complete life experiences in order to achieve psychological resolution necessary for final departure. Township records show that the Whitmore family abandoned their farm in March 1842, relocating to relatives in Ohio rather than continuing to live near the ongoing manifestations. Jonathan Whitmore's final letter to Constable Sterling, dated March 15, 1842, expressed his belief that Timothy would eventually find peace once the family had moved beyond his reach. The letter contained Jonathan's request that future sightings not be reported to the family, as they had accepted Timothy's death and needed to proceed with their lives. Sterling's case file remained officially open until his retirement in 1847, though he continued private documentation of sporadic sightings reported by New Township residents unfamiliar with Timothy's history. The constable's final entry, dated December 1847, described a conversation with recent immigrant families who reported helpful encounters with a friendly child who guided lost travelers to safety during winter storms. These accounts suggested that Timothy's consciousness had evolved from desperate searching to protective assistance, indicating possible psychological resolution and purpose transformation. Reverend Clark's church records document declining reports through 1848, with final mentions occurring during the harsh winter of 1849, when several travelers credited a mysterious child with saving their lives. Timothy Whitmore's consciousness had apparently found peace through service to others, transforming from tormented searching to benevolent guardianship of his beloved township. The Timothy Whitmore case file resurfaced in 1923, when renovation workers at Millbrook College discovered Professor Ashworth's sealed research archive behind a bricked-up storage room in the Natural Philosophy Building. The archive contained detailed documentation, photographic evidence, and scientific measurements that had remained hidden for 82 years due to the college administration's concern about institutional reputation. Dr. Margaret Henley, great-niece of the original attending physician, led the 1923 investigation that brought modern analytical techniques to bear on Ashworth's preserved evidence. Her team's examination of Caldwell's original daguerreotypes, using advanced photographic enhancement, revealed additional anomalies invisible to 19th century investigators. Digital analysis conducted by Pennsylvania State University in 1987 confirmed that the sequential photographs showed genuine progressive movement, impossible to achieve through known manipulation techniques of the 1840s. The Millbrook Historical Society's restoration project uncovered Sterling's complete case file in the Township Hall's basement archives, providing comprehensive documentation of witness testimonies and investigation procedures. Contemporary researchers have identified 17 similar cases throughout Pennsylvania's rural counties between 1840 and 1860, suggesting a pattern of post-mortem consciousness manifestation during the era's medical uncertainty. The phenomenon appears linked to premature death declarations during disease epidemics, combined with emotional trauma that prevented psychological acceptance of mortality. Dr. Sarah Chen's 2019 doctoral dissertation at Temple University examined the Timothy Whitmore case within the broader context of 19th century death customs and photographic practices. Chen's research revealed that post-mortem photography often captured unexplained anomalies, though most families destroyed such images rather than preserve disturbing evidence. The Millbrook Cemetery Association maintains Timothy's gravesite as a historical landmark, noting in their official records that no further disturbances have been reported since 1849. Modern paranormal investigators have conducted extensive overnight vigils at the cemetery without detecting electromagnetic anomalies, temperature fluctuations, or visual manifestations. This absence of contemporary activity supports theories that Timothy's consciousness achieved resolution through its evolution from desperate searching to protective service before finally departing. The case continues to challenge researchers across multiple disciplines, from psychology and physics to theology and consciousness studies, without yielding definitive explanations. Timothy Whitmore's story raises fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, the definition of death, and the possibility that emotional bonds can transcend biological limitations. The documented evidence withstands scientific scrutiny, while simultaneously defying conventional understanding of physical reality and post-mortem possibilities. Perhaps most unsettling, the case suggests that our modern certainty about death's finality may be premature, and that consciousness operates according to principles we have yet to discover. The original daguerreotypes remain on display at the Millbrook Historical Society, where visitors can observe Timothy's impossible awakening, captured forever in silver, nitrate, and time. What would you do if faced with photographic evidence that consciousness persists beyond biological death, and that love itself might be powerful enough to breach the boundary between worlds? How do we reconcile documented scientific measurements with phenomena that challenge every assumption about reality, mortality, and the nature of human existence itself? Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of mystery, life, and the unexplained. This narrative aims to provoke curiosity, inspire wonder, and remind us that some truths defy simple explanation.